Good morning, Maria.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming to our embassy all the way from James Cook University in Cairns, Australia.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
And so they say every story has a start. And your love story with Batik, 30 years of experience, must also have a start. Can you please share with us how did you start?
Indeed, my fascination with Batik of Java started in Poland when I was still a student at the university. I was already interested in Indonesian culture, but I used to live in a city which had a very significant textile tradition. And therefore I was encouraged to look into Indonesian textiles because I was originated from Textile City. And we discovered that there's a very interesting group of Indonesian textiles which were made with wax, which is very similar to the way you decorate Easter eggs in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Poland. And therefore I was encouraged to look more deeply into that group of textiles. We found that their name is Batik, and that's how it started more than 30 years ago. And ever since, I'm fascinated with Batik of Java, with the technique, aesthetics, and also with the impact that Javanese Batik had outside Indonesia.
That's very interesting when you say how Batik impacts the international world. Because for Indonesian, especially Javanese, Batik is not only a cloth. It carries social status and also symbol. But in order for a value to be practiced by another culture, one society needs to believe that it's good for them to, practice. So why do you think Batik is very interesting for other people to practice?
Well, first of all, Batik on Java, it is a great textile art. And people who are interested in textiles or art in principle, they really appreciate Indonesian textiles. They are very, very special, exceptional in the word tradition. And Batik of Java is extremely creative fabric that responds to various stimuli coming from the outside, ever-changing, and it also developed a huge, very distinctive vocabulary of motifs which fascinate other people, the richness of the ornamentation of Batik. This is something that fascinated many artists across the world, but at the same time, the technique of wax, which hand-drawn wax, which produces fabrics that are quite unique. Two Batik fabrics made by hand, they could be similar, but they are always different, unique, because if you create something by human hand, well, each piece has unique character, and that's what was very much appreciated by the art, especially in Europe and the United States.
And also the world acknowledged this technique when in 2009 the UNESCO the Batik method is listed to the intangible heritage.
Exactly. I want to stress that that was the first fabric from Asia that was placed on the UNESCO list, Batik of Indonesia. So this is truly a great recognition and significance of this group of textiles at international level.
That's true. But how do you think that impacts Batik itself being acknowledged by the world?
Well, this recognition of batik is more than 100 years old. It was from around 1890, during colonial days, that Dutch artists in the Netherlands became fascinated with the art of the colony, then what was known as East Indies or Indonesia. And they were the first who introduced batik technique to the art of the Netherlands, and they studied very closely the principles of Central Javanese Batik, Kainsogan, and they transferred to the Netherlands the technology of dyeing, the way of drawing wax motifs very carefully without cracking of the wax, and they created truly fascinating artworks which became well recognized all over Europe. And after the Netherlands, other countries in Europe became also interested in the technique of Javanese batik and started to practice this technique on a large scale until today.
Wow, so batik really could be a cross-cultural facilitators, right? Connecting.
Very much so, very much so. Because what is very interesting that initially the direct contact between Indonesia and Europe were not that frequent in the end of the 19th century, not as frequent as they are today. But those artists who became interested in the technique of batik, well, sometimes they decided to visit Indonesia. It was just the reason, and this is happening until today. One of my friends, she's a batik artist in Germany, she visited Indonesia more than 20 times just because of batik, and I know other cases like that. So batik became a very important aspect of cultural promotion of Indonesia in the world.
And also people-to-people contact, right?
Absolutely.
But it's interesting that you mentioned a few countries in the Europe. But how is it in the United States?
Well, in the United States, the interest in the technique of batik started at the beginning of the 20th century, so it is just over 100 years ago. It was that impact that came from the Netherlands. I talk about that initial colonial connections, following which other countries became interested in the technique of batik. It was the same in the United States, especially in New York, at the Greenwich Village. There was a large group of artists who started to experiment with the technique of batik. There were even batik handbooks produced. The most well-known artists at that time were Peter Meyer, Margarita Zorak, and their works had major impact on other artists working in New York and later in other parts of United States. Also, there were special fashion collections of batik garments created in the United States around 1920s. And even today, there is a large group of artists who practice the technique of batik, but it's usually the art of the aspect of fine arts as paintings rather than as garments. Yes.
Touching that, actually, our batik export to the United States is quite big. In the 2007, the amount was 44.1 million US dollars, with 70% of it exported as garment.
Yes.
And but with that interaction and also with the advancements of technology, the difference between inspiration and cultural appropriation is very little. It's as fine as a thin hair. What do you think?
Well, this is very true, and this is also one of the aspects that I touch in my publication. Because inspiration and appropriation, what are they? Well, inspiration is quite common process because batik of Java, for example, has been also inspired by traditions of other countries like India or China. This is a common occurrence, and this is something that is happening all the time. Naturally, exactly. But when we look at appropriation, well, this is the issue when there are copyright associated with a particular artwork or field of knowledge, and if this knowledge is used in a way that is not ethically appropriate. It means somebody makes money without acknowledging the source or claiming its own copyrights over it. That's when we have appropriation. And this is sometimes also happening with batik. But the issue is that, of course, you cannot stop people practicing the wax technique all over the world because even in ancient days, wax resist dyeing was known outside Indonesia. It was practiced in ancient China, in ancient Greece even. So it is not exclusive to Indonesia, although very definitely batik in Indonesia, that technique was brought to the highest technical level. And that's why we have a name for this technique. It is Indonesian, but it was actually known in other parts of the world. So of course it could be freely practiced by other artists as well. But I don't think this is correct if somebody is copying exactly batik motifs and then claims that as his or her own work. This is not correct. This is appropriation.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And the responsibility of Indonesians actually how to, to let batik grows and evolve, but not necessarily losing its meaning. I think that's the responsibility of Indonesian.
Very much so. It depends. The future of batik of Indonesia depends on Indonesian people more than on outside markets, because we are looking at commercial aspect of textiles. But as you know, there's a lot more to Batik of Java especially. This is philosophical meaning, the cultural significance of those textiles, and only Indonesian people understand that and can protect it, not foreigners, not outsiders. And therefore it is also very important to educate people about batik so that at least they'll be able to recognize what is the factory-made batik print and what is handmade batik. Because this is a big problem with copies, machine-made copies of batik, which are flooding the market nowadays, and very often they have a name batik because they have batik motifs, but they have nothing to do with batik technique. So this is a very important aspect, which is also creating a huge challenge for handmade batik. So there should be a tighter trade rights here in that respect to protect this real handmade batik of Indonesia.
Following up to that, some people think that because before only a certain social class could wear a very fine batik tulis and also a specific motif, but now because of the printed batik and the cap batik, most of us can wear that. But as you said, it also posing some challenges. But in a way, batik print actually give access to more people to wear batik.
Well, batik motif, this is, of course, it's more democratic, we could say, in a way, and batik motifs are very beautiful, and there's nothing wrong with wearing batik, factory-made, mass-produced batik. Of course, handmade batik is very expensive, we know that, so it is becoming a fabric which is worn usually on special occasions. But it is very important not to confuse those two, and to make sure that we wear appropriate dress on special occasions. I remember an quite interesting event. I was invited once to the Kraton of Surakarta to witness some special ceremonies there. And I was asked not to wear batik dress. I could wear any pattern, but not batik, because my dress, if it was made of batik, could be not suitable for that occasion. It was a very strong message, and so I had to wear plain garments virtually. And I think that this is also something that Indonesian people, especially the younger people who sometimes don't have that knowledge, should keep in mind that there are particular motifs associated with particular situations, occasions in life. In the past, you marked your social status by wearing particular motif. Nowadays, it is not so relevant. You still do it within Kraton, where you have particular hierarchy. But outside Kraton, of course, you can do whatever you wish. So this is something important to keep in mind for young people to remember that.
And my last question is, do you have any tips and tricks on how we, the Indonesian Embassy in Washington, D.C., could educate more U.S. public about the fine art of batik?
Well, I think that it would really help to invite some batik artists with their presentations, and where they could show the process of batik making, and at the same time indicate the difference between machine-made batik and handmade batik, whether it is drawn with chanting, batik tulis, or whether batik chap, which is also included, batik chap is also included into the definition of batik, which was accepted by UNESCO. But most important is that process where we use wax resist dyeing. This is batik, and process without the wax resist, which is just printed in a factory. That's not batik, it's Cairns motif batik, that's how we say. But I think that it would really help to promote batik in that way, and I know that if you organize a live show of people working with batik technique, presenting the work, then usually it draws a lot of attention of people, and that's how they start understanding how this fabric is made. That to make one fabric, sometimes you need several kilograms of wax. People are not aware of it who look at the final product. So I think it is very important to send that message, why each of those handmade batik is different, unique, and how difficult and long is that process of making it. I'm sure that it will work. People will appreciate it because handwork is usually very much in high demand in the United States, and it is appreciated here.
Thank you. As we are about to commemorate our 70 years of bilateral relations with the United States next year, I think we're going to touch upon that, and maybe we could enhance the understanding between the people, because in government relations, the people actually the most important part.
Exactly, because they are those who create the links between countries.
Yes, that's right. And do you have anything to say to the public?
Well, I would like to mention that 2 years ago in Jakarta, I published a book which encapsulates almost 30 years of my research into batik of Java as inspiration to other countries, as inspiration to artists in Europe and United States, but also in Africa, in India, in Australia. And this book, the title is Batik Jawa bagi Dunia, Javanese Batik to the World. This is a bilingual book. It is in Indonesian language and as well as in English. And I insisted that the text will be in Indonesian language because I wanted as many Indonesian people as possible to have access to this information, because they can be truly proud that the textile tradition became inspiration to so many artists across the world. And at the same time, I'm very grateful to the organization in Jakarta, Komunitas Lintas Budaya, which decided to support publication of this book, because only because of their support, this book was finally available in Jakarta. It was published there, and it is distributed by Gramedia Bookshop in Indonesia.
Congratulations on that, and thank you so much for your dedication and also for your time.
Thank you so much. Great pleasure. I always enjoy talking about batik.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.